Okay, so today is the 22nd of March.
It is indeed.
2018. We're in Seattle, Washington. What's the full address here?
20330 60th Avenue West, Linwood.
Linwood. And we're at the home of Darragh. How do you pronounce your last name?
Darragh Metzger.
Metzger.
Yeah.
Do you know the origin of your name, Metzger?
It's actually Southern German Bavarian, and it means butcher. So if you go over there, anytime you watch into a Metzgerei, it's a butcher shop.
Okay. And the reason that we're here today interviewing you is you're going to tell us the story of your mother and father.
Yes.
And their connection to the Air Alaska episode with the bringing of the Yemenite Jews.
Yeah, Alaska Airlines.
Alaska Airlines. So let's start with your mother.
Okay.
Tell me your mother's maiden name, where she was born, as much as you can about her background.
Mother was born in 1922 in
her full name,
Pennsylvania.
Her full
Marian Frances Liscombe. She's the Dara of my name actually comes from her, because that's her branch of the family. Dara's an old family name, and someone in every generation gets it.
Okay.
It's supposed to be a guy's name, but yeah. Anyway, she was born to a fairly well-connected family over there.
In Pennsylvania?
Yes.
1922, you
1922.
said?
And then the family actually survived the Great Depression, but not on the level that they'd been. But she lived pretty well, compared to most of people at that time. And she was always very adventurous. Always. She was ahead of her time. She was a fireball. She had a real hot temper, and was pretty fearless. She showed saddlebred horses competitively up and down the East Coast for big-time breeders and stuff like that, and owned one of her own. She ran her own newspaper for a while in Beaver Falls. She got, when her older brother got his pilot's license, started flying illegally at 14, and their father paid for it. And she said, well, I want to fly too. And he said, oh, girls, no, never mind, you can't fly. So she went and got a job and paid for her own lessons and got her pilot's license when she was 18 years old.
So this is
in 1940. There were so few women pilots then. She was way ahead of her time. She also sang for a while in a swing band. She was a jazz singer, sang torch and blues songs, because her grandmother had been a concert singer.
Probably back in Germany, or in the States.
No. The Liscombes, the Darrahs, were Irish. And the Darrahs were here since the late 1700s.
Okay, so.
Yeah.
So your mother was very adventurous. So in 1940, your mother obtains
her pilot's license. So she could not find a job as a pilot. No one would hire an 18-year-old girl as a pilot. So she, she kept renting planes to keep her hours up and all that. She got a host of other jobs, and eventually a friend talked her into trying to become what was called an air hostess for Capital Airlines. So she thought, well, if I can't get in the air one way, I'll do it another. For her, flying, she enjoyed flying. But for her, it was all about the going places and the freedom and the doing things. In those days, there were so few regulations. You could jump in a plane and go someplace, And there were no chains. There was very little in the way of boundaries or restrictions, except for, of course, gas rationing during World War II.
Of course. Actually, I wanted to ask you, when World War II breaks out in 41, she's 19.
Yeah.
Did she want to enlist in?
Oh, did she? She wanted to be a WASP. And they rejected her.
What's a WASP?
Women's Auxiliary, Women's Air Service Patrol, or pilots. And they were, for Jackie Cochran, who was an early aviation pioneer, started this for, I think that's what it stands for. Anyway.
It's okay.
Patrol.
Yeah.
She started this so that women pilots could fly the planes and free up men to go enlist and fight in the war. So women flew the planes back and forth to where they needed to be stationed, out of the manufacturers, you know, to the airfields all over the world.
This was a program that was basically freeing up the men.
Yeah, to go fight the war.
So that they could go fight the war. And
Yeah.
the women pilots, just like with the factories.
Yeah.
Or even like
And
baseball.
she wanted to do this, but her dad and her older brother, Uncle Paul, were really good friends with Hap Arnold, General Arnold.
No.
Who was, okay, you know who, you don't know, oh, General Hap Arnold. General Arnold was a huge proponent of air power. And he was actually, it was fairly open secret, he was Jackie Cochran's lover. Anyway, they used their influence with him to get Mom banned from the WASPs because but they didn't tell her, she didn't find out till afterwards.
Why did they sabotage it?
Too dangerous. They didn't want their little darling out there risking her neck, so.
But it's civilian flights. It's not,
Yeah, well, the planes were very often not, the women actually didn't even get the basic safety concerns or compensation or anything else that the men pilots did. This was something that came out later. Very often they were flying planes that were downright dangerous to be in the air. They were flying them to places to be maintained.
So basically, your uncle and grandfather
They sabotaged her.
Sabotaged your mother's.
Yes.
And did she ever find out about this?
Oh, she did, eventually. But she didn't know at the time.
Of course. So what did she do?
She got a job at Curtiss-Wright, which was a airplane manufacturer, and she became a propeller inspector, and that's how she spent the war, was doing that.
Where was that?
That was in Philadelphia?
Yeah.
It was in Pennsylvania, East Coast still.
East Coast.
She's staying over there, yeah.
And she does that throughout the war? Is that,
yeah. And then after that is when she became a flight attendant, or what they called what Capital called air hostess.
So Capital Airlines?
Capital Airlines. They started, that was Pennsylvania Air. They changed their name to Capital Airlines.
Okay, so that's basically the first.
That was her first job as a,
Post World War II?
Yes.
She's already like 25.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Single.
She was very determined. She actually got engaged a couple of different times, but she just felt that the war years had robbed her of all the fun a girl her age should have. So she wanted to go out and live a little, you know.
So she joins Capital Airlines.
And flies all over the eastern United States. And she wanted to fly overseas, and Capital had no overseas flights. And her parents were very opposed to her going overseas. So she thought, okay, well, I'll bide my time and I'll, jump to another airline that'll take me there eventually. But she had a disagreement with the head stewardess and ended up getting fired.
At Capital Airlines.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the head stewardess thought Marian was trying to steal her man, basically.
Of course.
Which Mother was not.
Right.
But Mother was, Marian, you had to have met her. She was a tiny, tiny person.
Yeah.
But she could walk in a room and fill it with her presence.
Was a fireball.
She had immense charisma. She was beautiful. She was beautiful.
Yeah.
She had immense charisma. And she never thought of herself as a flirt or anything like that, but my mom was hot.
All right.
Men always noticed. She never had any trouble attracting men and keeping them around her. And that's basically what happened. As a captain in the airline had gone out to dinner with her while they were stuck in Chicago because of weather. And Mom thought nothing of it, a few laughs, whatever, drinks. And the head hostess went, boom, like I say, and accused her of stealing her man. And then Mom got mad back, and the next thing you know, she got fired. Yeah.
So where does she go after this?
Well, after that, she went to a photographic developing company and had the job there. She was afraid to try to get another because the head hostess had friends all over in the airline. And Mom was like, oh, God, no one's going to hire me now, crap, kind of thing. And decided to wait and lay low and see if things would blow over. And then as it happened, her brother, Uncle Paul, had applied for a job with this little startup tiny airline, Alaska Airlines. And he knew they were short of hostesses. So he asked their head steward, well, I've got a sister who's been, and they said, oh God, please send her to us. So in July of the first day of July, I think it was, 1948, my mother flew to Anchorage, Alaska to accept a job with Alaska Airlines as what they called them stewardesses.
Excellent.
And thanks to my Uncle Paul.
And we're going to hold Marianne's story right there.
Yes.
And now I want you to tell me about your father. And then we're going to link it up right at that point, and we're going to continue. But
Okay.
please tell me your father, where he's from, where he was born, his full name.
Daddy was born in Alberta, Canada, a little place called Lethbridge that at the time you wouldn't even be able to find on a map, in 1919. And until he was 16 years old, they didn't even have running water or electricity. He and his two older brothers and their father Lou, mother Elsie, they raised cattle and wheat on a farm in Alberta, and actually did pretty well, and he was educated in a one-room schoolhouse and all that. And he was the only member of his family. He didn't want to be a farmer. He never did. He came out of the womb wanting to fly. They had a neighbor named Ross, I think, last name, who actually had a little biplane that he would use to fly to the nearest real settlement, which I think was Sterling or May, but something actually called a town, which Lethbridge wasn't.
Which has a post office and a bar.
Yeah, you have to understand, if you've been there, there's rolling hills. You can see the Rockies off a little blue hazed line in the distance, and there's nothing.
Prairie.
Yeah.
Prairie.
So anyway, Ross would fly this plane, and he happened to cross the Metzger's acreage, and Dad would always stop and look up and watch it go overhead and say, someday.
What's your father's first name?
Oh, I'm sorry. Warren Carl Metzger.
Metzger. And that's
Yeah.
German. Metzger, as you explained to me.
Yeah.
It's German. And Carl Metzger?
Warren.
Excuse me. Warren Metzger.
Warren Carl Metzger. He went by Warren.
Warren, born in 1919. What kind of family did he grow up in? Were they religious?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Presbyterian?
I
Methodist?
think they were Lutheran.
Okay,
He
Lutheran.
became an Episcopalian after he married Mama.
Yeah, Lutheran probably makes sense since
Yeah.
you're from southern Germany.
Yeah.
He grew up in Canada,
Yes.
Alberta.
But his parents were Americans. In those days, you were automatic dual citizenship. He and his brothers were born up there. They were Canadian citizens, but they were also American citizens.
That was
Yeah.
before
Before the
NAFTA. What's it called?
NAFTA and all that garbage. I don't know when they started separating out, but now you're eligible for dual citizenship, but it isn't automatic. In those days, it was automatic. His parents were Americans. He was an American. He was both.
So he grew up in this small little.
He grew up in a farmhouse on a couple thousand acres in Alberta, Canada, with a town some distance away. And anyway, his parents, of course, wanted him and his brothers to be farmers. And his older brothers, sure.
And he didn't.
He was always different. He wanted to fly from the time he could remember. That was always his biggest dream, was to fly.
When did that materialize? When did that start or when did that start to materialize?
He, when he was finishing what you would call high school, it was always the same. Yeah, he always got really good grades, and he wanted to go to the Royal Air Force Academy, and he applied
In Canada.
Yeah, applied so he could become, as he said it, a snooty British officer.
Well, they're part of the Commonwealth.
They were at that time. They were still loyal British subjects.
No, they
Yeah.
still are.
Anyway,
They got the Queen on their thing.
yeah.
So
but they are an independent nation. They're just
No,
still.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So in 1939, when World War II breaks out, he's 20 years old. I mean, he's. But do you know what happened after high school, or was
Yes.
he already going straight to be a pilot, or he was?
Yeah, he
took
had.
the war?
It took. Well, actually, he became a pilot in 1938 because when he was getting ready to go to college, and he was going to go to, of course, the Royal Academy, and his parents desperately did not want that to happen because they were afraid Canada was going to be sucked along with Britain into the war. They were watching what was happening,
course. Well,
and they remembered World War I. No one,
course.
and they
Yeah,
said
of
they
course.
didn't want their sons involved. So he said, "Okay, I'll go to Tri-State University in the United States if you'll pay for flying lessons." It was parental blackmail, and it worked. They agreed. He went down.
Where's Tri-State? That's in New
That's
York?
in Illinois.
Illinois.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
So you went to go study at Tri-State. What was
Indiana.
What was he going to major in? Do you know?
aeronautical engineering with a minor in mathematics. And graduated, got excellent grades, and became an aeronautical engineer and a pilot. Got his license in 1938.
In the States.
Yeah, in the United States.
And
And as soon as he graduated, he promptly joined the Army Air Corps in the U.S.
Before the U.S. even joined the war.
Yeah. Well, it was they weren't in the war.
They weren't in the war
It was a way,
officially,
so it was placating his parents a little bit.
Yeah.
He would still get to fly, but he wouldn't actually be part of the war effort. So that was his poor
and
thing.
of course, so he joins the United States Air Corps in
The Army Air Corps.
38?
1940.
40, okay.
Yeah.
And
When he graduated.
do you know
I think
what
it was.
like before? So there's like a year before the war breaks out.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what he's doing in that year? Like, what's he?
I'm trying to remember. He graduated in 1940. I think he was still in college.
Okay.
So I think 40 was when he graduated.
Okay.
I'd have to look it up
It's
to
okay.
remember.
That's okay. When World War II, when America enters the war in 1941, in December of 1941.
Yes.
What's up with what goes on with your father? I mean,
Well, he joined up and he was sent to El Paso, Texas to learn to fly bombers. The thing you have to remember is Dad was 6'2" in his bare feet. In those days especially, and still somewhat, fighter pilots tended to be physically smaller because the
like
cockpits were
jockeys.
tiny.
Like
yeah.
jockeys.
Well, not that tiny, but they were smaller.
Yeah.
Bomber pilots, the planes they had to be bigger.
Yeah.
And also, fighter jocks tended to have hotter temperaments.
okay.
Bombers tend to be cooler headed. They had to be because they're up there being pretty much defenseless.
And more patient.
They did do,
and
yeah.
There's targets, and it's more calculated.
Exactly.
It's not just like a redhead going crazy.
Exactly. And that's not a universal rule, but that was kind of the way it was starting to end up. Dad was very cool-headed, generally. So that was something they said, okay. They started training him to be a bomber pilot. They also offered him a position as a test pilot, which of course he leaped at because, oh boy, flying newer, faster, more powerful airplanes.
Absolutely.
Cool.
It's like putting a kid in a toy shop and saying,
Oh, yeah.
you can only take 10 things.
Yeah. And it just so happened he was a pretty darn good natural pilot. And anyway, even without the training, and then, so he was the one that they offered, one of the ones. He and his best friend, J.J. Lamb, were the two offered this test pilot position. And J.J. spun out and was killed during a test flight. And a few months later, Dad was testing a remote control aircraft, and he was supposed to be able to take over if something happened to the remote control. Except that didn't happen. The remote control and the manual died. And at the same time when he was coming in for a landing, and boom. And he should have died and didn't. He broke his back. He was pretty messed up. And the doctors told him he'd never walk again, which actually made him mad, which was hard to do with Dad. And a year later, he walked out of the hospital and they said, okay, be happy for this. You'll never fly again. And he got right back into planes and started flying. A year after his accident. And if you look at pictures of him then, I mean, there's nothing to him. He's skin and bone. And his right leg never did recover. He never got full use of it again. So he was never cleared for combat duty again. Okay. But he instructed other pilots, he towed targets, he ran reconnaissance missions.
Where?
Also, over the Gulf of Mexico, hunting for German subs and stuff and, coming in there.
So he was more on the home front. Kind
Yeah.
of.
He also, for a while, commanded a squadron of wasps. He and another guy.
How did that accident affect him, do you think?
It's hard to say. He didn't lose his love of flying, and he got back into it. And I think he was angry and ashamed that he didn't get to go fight. Mm-hmm. I think that was more upsetting to him than anything, that he felt sidelined, and he was never cleared to be a test pilot again either.
Sure.
And that was what he wanted to do.
Foot.
Yeah, the leg and everything. But anyway, he dealt with it.
Okay.
And then, but his body, they never did quite get his body working right again. And he finally got an honorable discharge in 1945, before the war was actually over. Uh-huh. They were trying to get him, he was flying Martin B-26s and stuff like that, and he couldn't, the physical problems became more and more problematic with it. And he finally accepted honorable discharge, went out and tried to find something in civilian life, flying.
And where did he find it? Like right after the war?
Right after the war, he didn't for a long time. There were so many, the war was over. There were pilots for, 10 pilots for every position, for anything. And for a while he sold Hudson automobiles, which were his favorite car in the world. And but that convinced him that, yeah, Hudsons are the best car, were the best car on the road. He always owned, for the rest of his life, he always owned Hudsons. We always had Hudsons. But it also convinced him that he was not meant to be a salesman.
Yeah.
And that he had to get back in the air no matter what. And he finally found a job with Worldwide Airways in Canada, which was based out of Montreal, Canada. Flying, they would take planes, recondition them for either, civilian or Air Force or whatever, and then send them out across the world to whoever had bought them.
And he would fly them out to the...
He flew out, yeah. So this was a wonderful job. He adored every bit of it, except being in Montreal, which he loathed.
He didn't like Montreal?
Oh, he hated Montreal.
Oh, I love Montreal.
Well, he was Canadian.
Yeah.
And he was British Canadian.
Yeah.
At those days...
Québécois, so he was, okay, gotcha.
Mais oui, it was before... It was before de Gaulle did his,
Yes.
Libre Quebec thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But there was still a lot of, the French Canadians hated the British Canadians hated the French Canadians.
Okay.
So he was treated like a hostile foreigner there.
Okay.
And
But he loved the job, and he was going
loved the
abroad,
job.
and he was going...
Yeah, he was flying
across the
these
world.
wonderful planes all over the world, getting to do things.
Yeah.
And then, again, because of my Uncle Paul, who by that time was flying for Alaska Airlines, Uncle Paul told, Paul Liscombe, told Jim Wooten, who was the new president of Alaska Airlines. Jim Wooten was trying to, he had just come on board, and he had just picked up a couple of C-46s and DC-4s.
He was the owner of Alaska Airlines, right?
No, he was the CEO and
CEO,
president.
okay.
The owner was a man named Raymond Marshall.
Okay.
Raymond Willem Marshall. And who was a New Yorker and universally loathed and despised throughout the airline, so I don't need to go into that.
Okay, that's fine.
Anyway,
Jim?
but Jim Wooten, he had come over from American Airlines, was offered the position of CEO president, took it. And he immediately picked up a couple of C-46s and DC-4s and said, okay, we're going to be giant scheduled non-carrier because there's a huge market for that. We're going to do this. And he immediately picked up some jobs for the Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, ferrying stranded Jews and refugee Jews to places all over the world, even to Australia, South Africa, everywhere.
So I know the story about Shanghai.
Yeah.
Right, there were Jews in Shanghai
Yes.
after the war that were flown to Palestine, Israel at the time. Right, which
Yeah.
Elgin told me about yesterday.
Yes.
There were the other
All over the
locations?
world. And he immediately picked up some of these jobs.
So basically, the JD, what was it called?
JDC.
The JDC,
Jewish Joint Distribution Committee.
right, in the United States.
Yeah.
Hired Alaska Airlines. They
Chartered
Alaska
yes.
Airlines to
Do this ferrying work.
do these work of getting Jews who are displaced around the world back to Israel.
At the time, no, just wherever, getting, if they were stranded here, Alaska Airlines ended up taking a bunch to Australia and South Africa.
Probably from Europe.
Yes.
Who were
Anywhere they could go where they had,
These were the displaced Jews
Yes.
after the Holocaust. So okay.
And it's occasionally into Tel Aviv, yes, but at that time, Israel was Palestine. It was not,
Exactly. So your father, when does he get a job with so you said through your uncle?
Through my uncle, who, James Wooten, had several of these planes reconfigured for human transport, wanted them, and he needed a stress analysis done on them. So he needed an engineer. He needed an aeronautical engineer. And Uncle Paul Liscombe said, well, I happen to know this guy who's in the Royal Academy of Engineers,
Wait, this is your
Stress
uncle?
Engineers. Yes. Told
Your mother's brother.
My mother's brother. Told him about Warren Metzger, who at that time, because he'd done
Did they
stress
know each
Analysis. Yes.
Your uncle
Yes.
and your father knew each other before he knew
Yes,
your mother?
they met in El Paso and various places that, as
During the
flight.
war.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they had known each other. And Uncle Paul, by the way, is the guy who flew the Japanese to the Missouri to sign the surrender papers. He was a decorated pilot.
Who did he fly?
He flew the Japanese delegates to the USS Missouri to sign the surrender.
Okay.
He was the pilot.
August 15th, September 15th,
Yes.
1945. Yeah.
That was him.
Wow.
But anyway, Dad had done stress analysis and other jobs for worldwide airways also. So he was registered in the Royal Academy of Engineers or Royal Engineers, of Canada. So Jim Wooten was, oh wow, and called him up, offered him a job, and Dad said anything to get out of Montreal. And he thought,
hold on a second.
Okay.
Anything to get out of Montreal?
Yeah.
I'm just stopping. Okay. I just stop it once in a while so your dad gets this job offer out of
for Alaska Airlines.
For Alaska Airlines, and he's very happy.
Oh boy.
To get out of Montreal.
Yes.
Montreal. Right?
Yeah.
How they call it. What year are we talking about?
That was 1948. No. Yeah, the end of 1947, so early 1948.
Your father
That would
joins
be.
Alaska Airlines.
Yes.
As a pilot or as a...
As an aeronautical engineer at the time.
So he starts as an aeronautical engineer.
To perform the stress analysis and suggested modifications for these C-46s
Sure.
that Jim Wooten was looking at using for transporting human cargo, people. And then when at some point he had to do it again or whatever, and Jim Wooten found out that he was, oh wow, he's a licensed pilot. He has all these hours. He's done these planes, and he's an aeronautical engineer. And he moved him to the flight line in June of 1948.
June of 1948.
Dad had to do the test flights on the modified C-46s at that point again, and at that point, he moved into the flight line. And in fact, he met Mother. He was the co-pilot in a DC-4 on the flight that took my mother up to Anchorage. So they met there
For
the first time.
And this is when she starts her job.
When she started her job.
Like she met your father off the bat.
And he asked her out because he was totally smitten the minute he saw her. He asked her out for coffee. She hated coffee. And she was not interested in dating right then because she had a new life to start. So she just said, no thanks. She was going to be stationed in Anchorage. He was going to be stationed in Everett, Washington. Yeah, no biggie. So that was the end of that right there. Then Alaska Airlines started getting these charters for everything. Alaska Airlines worked the Berlin airlift, did support flying in and out of Frankfurt and München, and I think several others.
Elgin explained that to me yesterday, how they were there, but they weren't doing the actual airlift into Berlin.
They were flying support.
They were flying support around so that the Air Corps pilots could all focus on the
getting the supplies
itself,
into Berlin.
Were doing the other things. They were taking off missions from them so that they could all be. So the Berlin airlift.
And Daddy flew that. So did Mother, although rarely together. They flew that.
So they're like when they met, it was on. Like it was like it happened.
Mother, Mom thought he was very good looking, which he was. But she'd already been burned from dating somebody in the airline, so she wasn't going to do it again.
Exactly, she's not going to.
Yeah. And it was love at first sight for him, pretty much. And he was already very heavily involved with another woman, but had been, and as soon as he broke it off with Kay, and that was it. That was it. And Mom didn't start softening on that until quite a bit later.
Okay.
Anyway.
So they're working together in Alaska Airlines.
Alaska Airlines.
They're in Berlin, in Germany.
Yep.
With your mother's there also.
Over there, Frankfurt and the other surrounding. Yes.
But I mean, they're like in the same area of the globe at this time in 1948.
Yeah. And occasionally flew on the same flights. Alaska Airlines was a tiny, tiny airline at the time.
Sure.
Everybody knew each other.
Sure.
Everybody socialized together.
Sure.
It was all of us, all the kids. Well, that was later, but we went to school together. The spouses were all friends or all worked for the airline. It was a very, very clannish, a very tiny and very clannish airline, and everybody knew each other's business. So.
It's like in Israel we call it. It's like everything's like a kibbutz.
Yeah, very much.
Everybody knows.
Very much.
Now, with your permission, I want to move to the episode of. Well, chronologically, we're kind of there.
Mm-hmm.
Your mother and father's involvement with Palestine or the state
Yes.
of Israel. Can we start opening that up?
Yes.
Okay.
Marshall Fields III and Eddie Warburg approached, who was like co-chairman, president of the JDC, approached Wooten again and said, look, we have this emergency situation. There are these 1,000, 1,200 Jewish children stranded in Aden who need to be taken to Israel. Can Alaska Airlines do it in very short time? Can Alaska Airlines do it? And there were a whole lot of hurdles at the time. The governor of Aden, which was a British protectorate, was kind of against him. He'd grudgingly given his support, but he was very afraid that starting a Jewish rescue mission out of Aden would start another war.
1948?
Yeah, 48.
48
at that point.
Okay.
He was very afraid it would touch off another war.
Okay.
Israel had declared itself a nation in May 14th.
Yeah.
And immediately the Arab League was up in arms.
The war broke out.
There was a war.
Yeah.
And here was the British protectorate. I mean, Britain had just fought World War II. They were punch drunk. They were broke. They were, And here they were trying to protect this little place. And every Jew in Yemen had heard that there was a new king, David, in Israel.
Right.
And there had been, a typhus plague and a civil war going in Yemen. All these reasons why the Jews wanted the heck out. And so they did a mass migration to the British protectorate to try to get out. So the British were taking all these people in that they had no facilities for, no food, no housing, no nothing. And the Arabs started killing them. So the British basically rounded them all up and put them in a refugee camp, which had been a prisoner of war camp, which had been constructed to maybe hold maximum 1,500 people, and it ended up holding like 5,000. At one point, I think at the very height there were like 10,000 people crammed into this place, and but at the time that Marshall Fields and the JDC contacted Jim Wooten, there were at least a couple thousand people. They only told him initially about the children that needed to go out.
That was the hook.
Yeah, and so he said, "Not a problem. We'll make this happen." And he was kind of a magician logistically. He had planes and pilots all over the world doing various charters and airlifts and everything. So he was they contracted for 2 C-46s and 2 DC-4s to go over there and get the kids out and get them to Tel Aviv. And of course, the entire route, they were flying over Muslim territory and over war zones. There was active shooting going on. There was anti-aircraft stuff left over from World War II. And the Egyptians' troops, for instance, had been trained by Germans. They were world-class troops, and they had German anti-aircraft stuff. There were crack troops all over the place with, just waiting for the chance. And it was not particularly, it was a very dangerous mission. There was just no question about it. Not that Wooten actually said that to the pilots, but they all figured, they were old World War II vets, they figured it out pretty fast. And Dad was asked at the end of 1948 if he would go over there and fly, and he said yes, of course. So, and he was made at that point a captain of the C-46. So, and Mother got asked if she would, at the same time, if she would be willing to fly the flights from Shanghai to Tel Aviv. And the head stewardess kind of hemmed and hawed, and Mom was going, well, gee, that's, because it's a pay bump and everything. I am a junior stew. Why am I being offered? And the head stewardess kind of hemmed and hawed, well, you still have your pilot's license current, right? And Mom said, oh, I'm flying into a war zone and they want extra pilots on board. Cool. Because she was feisty. To her, that was exciting.
So she piloted?
No, she was a spare pilot. She figured they're on board. If something happened to the pilots, boom, she was so ready for it.
So she's like
psychologically.
She's like a stewardess on standby to be a pilot.
Yeah.
From Shanghai to Tel Aviv.
Yeah. So there were about, they reasoned at the time, 500 Jews stuck in Shanghai who needed to get out because the communists were closing in, and they already knew from bitter experience what would happen when that, So they needed to get, again, and a lot of them were already Russian and German refugees, so they'd already lost everything once getting there. Sure. And here they were. And So Mom agreed to fly those flights. And anyway, she went there to do that while Dad was flying the Yemenites out of Aden. And there were chronic fuel shortages because, of course, there's a war going on. Israel didn't have any fuel. Guess who had all the fuel?
The Polish.
Yeah. So it was really hard. I mean, the British had some, but they were keeping an active force in the area they didn't have. It was very, very difficult. There was no housing. There was just huge snafus about who was supposed to have arranged what for whom, and massively confusing. But the pilots basically ended up having to be stationed in Asmara, Eritrea, because, no one was trying to kill anybody there. And they would take off from there. They would fly to Aden, where Alaska Airlines established a fuel dump, basically. Refuel the planes, get the people on board, fly to Tel Aviv, and then they had to fly to Cyprus to get more fuel, and then back to Asmara. And this was and Wooten, being Wooten, he considered the weight limits of the planes more just guidelines. So in order to be able to pack as many people on board as possible, he'd basically only let the pilots fuel to about half. So they were flying on pretty low tanks generally, and Dad minimized the danger, but he told me later, he said, there were a couple times I came into Tel Aviv on fumes and didn't have enough left to make it to Cyprus. And they couldn't leave the planes in Tel Aviv because, of course, the airport was being bombed periodically. And the pilots got shot at, while they were flying all this. The first day that Dad was in Aden, a person that he referred to as a British officer, and I don't know if he actually was or not. Dad thought he was the person in charge of the camp, but it wasn't. Told him if you are shot down, or if you have to make an emergency landing, try to land in the Red Sea near a British or European ship. Because if you land anywhere on the surrounding Arab territory, if the military gets to you first, you and your co-pilot might survive, but your passengers will not. And Dad had already walked through the camp and he'd seen all these tiny children, running around, and he said, even the little kids? And the officer said, my dear, the Arabs will see these little children and will just see something that will grow up to be a big Jew. Which just shocked Dad. In fact, that was the most frequent story he told, was how deeply that shocked him, the thought that anybody could harm a little tiny child with these, the big brown eyes that would follow him around like a puppy. They were very endearing.
What did your father tell you about being in those camps in Aden?
He made a tour through, and he didn't talk a lot about it, except the conditions were very rough, as he put it, and that the children are the biggest memory that he has of it, because he said, all you had to do was smile at them, and they'd, and you had children attached to you and following you around. Like I say, they would follow him like a puppy through the camp. And they were shy. It also bothered him that he never saw any of them playing or laughing. They were very, very quiet, and that bothered him. And that their eyes were too old.
Their eyes were old.
Yeah. And that bothered him a lot, because thinking about what those children had seen and been through.
How many missions did he fly from Yemen to Israel? Roughly. Roughly.
I would have to look that up. Roughly. Somewhere between 10 and 20.
Yeah.
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 He went after he was released in March, and he went back to the U.S., and then he came back later and flew a couple of fuel runs, but didn't fly any more passengers. He did some support runs
for the same mission.
Yes.
Yeah.
But he did not fly. The C-46s were retired from doing it because they, frankly, the fuel problem. The C-46s could not make the distance.
Yeah.
It was really chancy. And the pilots didn't feel safe doing it, and they also simply wouldn't hold that many people. The DC-4s would. Did your
mother do any runs down to Yemen, or she didn't do that? She was more on the Shanghai.
She did it once or twice that I know of.
She did experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
She was allowed to fly with Dad. They told her, if you stay in the cockpit, and don't go back. You can go. But she went back anyway. Because
rules are meant to be broken.
Kinda.
Yeah.
She says, well, they need help, and by golly, that was her.
Yeah.
She would do that.
Yeah.
And the flight that she flew with Dad, which was right after they were married.
Where were they married?
They were married in Asmara. In between flights, they came in. She came in from Shanghai. He came in from Tel Aviv. They landed, and he said, "Look, if we can, you want to get married tomorrow?" And she said, "Sure." And they did. The mayor, Dionisio, I think, Mayor Signore Dionisio was the mayor of...
Italian dude?
Yes, the mayor. He didn't speak any English,
of course,
but he was delighted.
Sure.
It ended up being the social event of Asmara for the season.
So this is 1948 they got married?
49. The end of January 1949 at the Albergo Ciao Hotel. And the wedding got crashed. Every pilot who was actually in there, who was still there, not out on a mission, everybody came. And then everybody who heard about it came. So the wedding got crashed by just about everybody.
Sounds
and
like,
it was a big
what's
deal.
His name? Andrew Jackson's inaugural... where he opened up the White House to the public, and basically there were bathtubs full of gin, stuff like that.
Yeah,
So
it got pretty wild.
But so they got married.
They got married
in Eritrea, which is very interesting. But
yes.
you were saying when I stopped you before that, you were saying that they flew together.
Yeah.
A few missions.
I'd have to look it up. The one I know of for sure. Yeah. And I honestly am not sure whether they did more than one, because Mom at various times gave conflicting information on that. But the one time that I know of that they flew together, which was right after they were married, and Mom said it happened when they landed. Dad said it happened after they disembarked. And I went with Mom, in the book, I went with Mom's version, and I'm thinking probably Dad remembered it better. But when they landed, anyway, and Mom went back and opened the doors and everything to help everyone disembark, and a little old lady grabbed the hem of her skirt and lifted and kissed it, and to thank her. And Mom said on the one hand, she felt 1.5 inches tall because she felt like I did nothing, On the other hand, she was thanking me because we were the wings of eagles and we've done this for them, and it made her feel 10 feet tall and 1.5 inches at the same time. It's wonderful that we're doing this wonderful thing, and I personally did so little, right. But she always did what she could because Mom wanted to be involved in everything all the time, and she had a huge heart, extremely generous. She couldn't not help. When she saw something that needed doing, she couldn't not go and try to do it. It just wasn't in her nature.
Let's talk a little bit about the book that you wrote.
Yes. There we go.
How did you start this, and how did you?
All right. As I may have implied, my parents were both larger-than-life people and lived incredibly adventurous lives. And I always thought someone, not me, should write their biographies. I'm a fiction writer. I'd never written nonfiction. And to me, that project intimidated the heck out of me.
Sure.
But I always thought...
It's your parents, too,
it's my parents. Yeah. But they were actually pretty heroic people. And, like I say, bigger than life. And I always thought, somebody should write about these people. Somebody... like I say. In 2007, my dad got interviewed by a TV station in Anchorage about his part in Operation Magic Carpet. And after, he told that, and I watched him on the TV, and by that time he was, 88 years old? And I looked at him going, and if that story doesn't get written, it will never be written. And I thought, okay, I can't write about all their lives, but I can write that one episode. I can tell that story, a story that I grew up with and that I knew very well.
They talked about it with you guys about the magic carpet operation.
Oh yeah. Well, like I say, Alaska Airlines was very clannish. We all socialized together.
Sure.
So picnics and cocktail parties and whatever.
Right.
And what do pilots and stews and everybody talk about when they get to their adventures flying? So I grew up with these stories from the various, and of course, we were allowed to stay with the adults as long as we were quiet. So my brothers and I would sit in the corner and listen to these stories about their adventures in the air, you know, everybody. And it was like, there was one of my favorite forms of entertainment.
Sure.
So I heard Larry Roger talk about laughing about, you know, tracers going by the cockpit on his way coming into Tel Aviv one time, and I heard Bob McGuire's story about him coming in and having to declare that he had smallpox on board in order to avoid, because he had to make an emergency landing in Port Sudan, and it was like, this is such a bad idea, and so he radioed ahead and said he had smallpox, which of course kept them from storming the plane. They just brought fuel out and said, go away. Right. And that's how he got out of there safely. I heard these stories growing up, and everyone always laughed. You know, they laugh, oh yeah, and the tire blew out, ha ha, I lost 2 engines on approach, ha ha. It's funny when they tell it. It's not funny when you think about what the situation was. But they were always laughing about it. It was a big adventure. So I'd hear all these stories, and yeah, anyway, I wanted to tell that. I started just writing my parents' love story. But the more I researched and I got into it, and it just kept expanding and getting bigger and bigger. There's so much to this story. There's so much that I haven't told. Elgin Long wrote his own memoirs about it, which is, again, just part of the story. It's a huge story.
It's just part of it. It's just a part of the puzzle.
And some of it, like I say, the passengers and the other people involved, I don't have those stories either. Hopefully they get recorded. I hope they do, because that needs to be preserved. That history needs to be saved. And I wrote all the parts of it that I could find. When I started researching, it took me 10 years. When I started researching it, there was very little information available. But as time went on, more information, especially starting in about 2015, a lot of information became available. By that time, the book was finished, but yeah, there's a lot more information available now about Operation Magic Carpet than there was when I started. But all that I could find, I put in there. So
and Operation Magic Carpet, Air Alaska's part in
Alaska Airlines.
Alaska Airlines part of it is very big. And
yes. Yeah. They basically stopped. Alaska Airlines had to stop doing the charter as Alaska Airlines starting in mid-1949. Yeah. But
because they were ratted out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Elgin told me that.
Oh yeah. But Bob McGuire and Hank Molyneux and Jim Wooten started Near East Air Transport and borrowed a lot of Alaska Airlines planes and pilots and whatnot, and continued the airlift, and with a lot of Mahal pilots as co-pilots.
Did Jim Wooten have any moral issues with the saving of Yemenite Jews? Was he driven by...
Jim Wooten was P.T. Barnum. There's a big chunk of Jim Wooten. He was a genius, an absolute genius in some ways, and he was a con man in a lot of others. He started thinking of all this as so many dollars ahead. But after his first visit to the camp when he was setting it up, and especially after his first flight, which was flying, he had 104 children on his first flight, and he came in and it got to him big time. It became personal at that point. It was something that had to be done. For Bob McGuire, it always was. He was an Episcopalian, and he felt God appointed him to do this.
Bob McGuire?
Yes.
What was Bob McGuire's position? He
was chief pilot of Operation Magic Carpet, but he became president, CEO of Near East Air Transport.
So Bob McGuire, it was
a personal mission. It was a personal mission for him. He was a very quiet, understated man, but he didn't talk a lot about it.
Right.
But it was deeply personal to him.
And Jim Wooten, it became personal.
It became personal.
It started as a dollar sign.
Oh yeah.
But then he actually
absolutely
saw what the hell was going on.
Yeah.
It just
it ripped him up.
Yeah.
It ripped him up.
Yeah.
You know, you couldn't see those conditions and not be deeply affected by them.
Sure.
Every pilot that I heard from, everybody I talked to said the same thing. It was, you couldn't stay dispassionate about it. You couldn't. And there ended up being a couple of Jewish pilots. Sam Silver was one, and I think Stanley Epstein. He was hired on. He wasn't an Alaska Airlines pilot, but he was hired for this mission. He came and offered his services and joined up while he was over there. He was Israeli, and. But even though 99% of the pilots were not Jewish at all,
sure.
The information about what had happened during World War II had come out, and there was a huge feeling of never again. This is not happening again. And so the pilots were going in and being very aware that these people need to be gotten out of there so that will never happen again. They need to be taken home and basically saved. They were very aware that they were saving the lives doing this. And they didn't consider it, like I say, they were World War II vets. They didn't consider it life risk. It was like,
Yeah.
To them,
it was like, okay, yeah.
Big whoopee, part of the job.
Yeah. Now, about the book.
Yeah.
So it started out as you telling the story of your mother and father's love story.
Yes.
But it actually...
And it mushroomed. And it became the story of the entire operation. By the way, Operation Magic Carpet's official name by the U.S. Department was actually On Wings of Eagles.
From the Bible.
Yeah. Because the name Operation Magic Carpet had already been given to the U.S. operation to bring the troops home from Europe.
Okay.
But Israel adopted the name Operation Magic Carpet for it. And I don't really know the reasons for that. It just simply was latched onto this. It caught on and it completely supplanted On Wings of Eagles. They loved the name, they used it, and that's how the mission is known today.
On Wings of Eagles.
On Wings of Eagles, after the big little.
That?
That was, I believe, the U.S. State Department.
On the Wings of Eagles.
On the Wings of Eagles.
Which is from the Book of Exodus.
Yeah, and Ezekiel.
It's referring to the Exodus of the Jews
Isaiah.
from Egypt.
Yes.
Egypt. I think it's from
There
Exodus,
are two biblical passages that speak about being born to Israel on the wings of eagles, and that was why they named it that.
What did you discover in researching and writing the book that you didn't know before?
That I didn't know before.
Yeah.
Wow, so much.
Give me something.
Well, I knew the story about them. The pilots, the first, Clark Cole flew the first load in a C-46 in mid-October of 1948, and that is... my early research said, the mission, there were several conflicting dates of when the mission started, but actually they're all wrong because it started mid-October. Clark Cole flew the first. And when he first brought the 46 in and they were trying to get the first load on board, and a lot of these Yemenites, Yemen was a very primitive place, very medieval.
Unfortunately, it still is.
I understand that.
Hold on a second.
Okay.
All right. So, about Yemen. So
a lot of the Yemenites who were from like Sana'a, if that's it, and Aden were fairly modernized.
Yeah,
whatever, at least as modern as they could be.
Aden.
Oh yeah, they were very sophisticated. But most of the other Yemenites from actual Yemen, the Jews, they had lived in less
caves.
Some of them had.
Yeah.
Caves, tents.
Yeah.
They were never allowed to live in the conditions that the Arab, their neighbors were.
No.
So a lot of them, when they had never seen even electricity and running water or a car. Let alone an airplane. They might have seen one flying overhead, but...
Sure.
And they were scared to get on board.
Sure.
So the pilots found some model paint and they painted eagles over the doors or on the doors to make it clear. And this was at the advice of one of the rabbis, actually, who told them reminded them of those prophecies and said, okay. So they put the eagles on there, and the Yemenites saw that, and as the rabbis explained, look, the prophecy is being fulfilled. And so they loaded, and it was not a problem anymore. The dates I hadn't known. I was iffy on. I hadn't known about some of the problems with the planes and the dates, the numbers, just some of the headaches that the crews went through.
You can say it out loud, it's fine.
Missing kids.
That's not my story to tell. I hadn't known about some of the things that went on in the camp.
In Aden.
In Aden.
Yeah.
Yes. Hashed. I learned later, and there are a lot of things I learned that I didn't put in the book because I felt it was not my story to tell. It needs somebody else. Probably the Ammonites need to tell that story.
Okay.
I didn't know about some of this. I didn't know about. There was a great deal of miscommunication and things that went on. One camp, Hashed, was destroyed, dismantled.
What was it dismantled?
It was dismantled at one point in like April or May. It was somewhere around there. I'd have to look it up.
What was dismantled?
The camp was dismantled because they'd gotten the first load out,
right.
And who is it? Sir Reginald was the champion. Sir Champion, who was the governor of Aden, said, "Okay, we're done. We'll build a new camp somewhere else that has better facilities. But for now, we've gotten everyone out. It's good. Now and with all the information that they'd been given elsewhere, they figured, okay, there'll be 700 or 800 more trickling in over time. We'll have plenty of time to do this." So they dismantled the camp, and all of a sudden there were floods of Jews coming out of Yemen, thousands literally sleeping on the bare desert with nowhere to go. Starved, disease-riddled, a lot of them. They would arrive and they would have been robbed and made this trek, and they would literally have nothing but the rags of clothes. And they had nowhere to go. And I know when, like Lelgin Long's crew, Larry Curry, and Bill Lester, and that was the crew that Long was in. When they came in, they were told by, I think, the commander of the airfield said, please, 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 you've got to. These people are coming in. They have nowhere to go. Please help. And they contacted us. Okay, got to do it. So they flew. I know his crew flew more nonstop missions through March and April than any other crew. They lived in their plane. Barely stopped for fuel and to kick the dust out of the engines. I wasn't aware of how many other airlines, pilots, aircraft tried to help. There were a number of other small airlines who were subcontracted by Alaska Airlines to help, or individuals, lone pilots who have plane will travel, that joined on. But very few of them flew more than 1 or 2 missions because the mission was so hard on the airplanes. Starting in the early mornings, when the heat would come up, the dust would rise up to 8,000 feet in the air. And that chewed the heck out of the engines. The C-46s, after every flight, would have to be completely cleaned out, re-oiled, parts replaced, whatnot. Some of them, I think there was a couple of C-54s and Tudors that had that beautiful Rolls-Royce engines, fine-tuned perfection, that were completely destroyed every time they'd fly a single flight and they'd be done. The airline that used them would have to completely replace the engines on there, and they couldn't do it. There were Alaska Airlines went through the whole thing, didn't lose a single life. They lost one plane that was a fuel run.
Yes.
Yeah. That was an accident. But that was the only plane they lost. It had no passengers, and no one was killed.
No one was killed. Elgin told me about that also
Yeah,
yesterday. Yeah.
it was, and it was miraculous. More than one pilot said, God must have been on our side because we shouldn't have succeeded. It shouldn't have been gone this way, but it did.
It did.
Yeah, and in spite of everything, and like I say, planes were shot at. They were bombed. That kind of stuff went on and on. There were at one point riots in Aden, and the flights had to be suspended for a few days. And this, that, and the other thing were going on. And of course, there were the Jewish holidays, which none of the pilots understood. They won't fly on a Jewish
Sabbath. Yeah, you can't fly on the Sabbath.
Hi, you do know your life is in danger if
Exactly.
you do. Okay, yeah. That was a constant problem too, having to reschedule and change schedules and redo who could take what planes out. That was surprising. I didn't know about the things that went on with Near East Air Transport and Alaska Airlines. I had never known the story. Dad never knew. Mom and Dad never knew the story of why Alaska Airlines was phased out and Near East Air Transport took over. Yeah, they had never known that.
It was basically the same thing.
Yeah.
Just they switched the names.
Yeah, they had to because Alaska Airlines, as you say, got ratted out.
Yeah.
And that was the only way to continue the mission. So that was what happened. But gosh, Bob McGuire lost everything on that mission.
What did he lose?
He started in partnership with Jim Wooten, and he was supposed to be getting, of course, his salary and then 10% profit over and above. And he actually, Wooten had kind of slipped a little, one of those, quick, sign this, sign this, sign this under him, and he'd signed his rights away. He also, while flying, he didn't find that out till afterwards though, but after 2 years of flying, and he started having medical troubles, and of course going in for his required pilot's exam, he found out that he had developed heart trouble because he'd gone swimming at some point in Aden, and a parasite had gotten in and eaten holes in his heart. Of course, without being able to fly anymore, he could no longer run the airline. That was the end of Near East Air Transport, and the end of his flying career. So he lost everything doing that. And then he found out when he went to collect that, gee, he also hadn't made any money on it. But he came back to the state, and his supposed best friend, Jim Wooten, had basically ripped everything off from him. Because Wooten couldn't help being Wooten. But when he got back to the States, he eventually built, I guess, a real estate and a mortgage, and some other thing that he was involved with. And he built quite a fortune for himself and his family did really, really well back in the States. They prospered. But I always felt that was like, wow.
And your parents kept on working for Alaska Airlines.
Oh, yes. Yeah, Dad worked for the airline for 32 years.
Wow.
He ended up being he was chief pilot for many years, and was vice president of operations by the time he retired. When he retired in 1979, and in those days, a pilot had to stop flying when they were 60. That was the law, which is ridiculous. But he didn't want to stay at the airline doing a desk job,
right.
So he just went ahead and retired at 60. And he took a few private piloting jobs, ferrying other people's planes around. At one point, some Saudi Arabian sheikh, in fact, he was his private pilot for a while. But after living over there for a while, they figured out that this is not going to work out. His mother was not doing well in Saudi Arabia. Not her cup of tea. So that didn't last for very long. But he did other private piloting jobs around, and he consulted for other airlines. He was considered a professional witness or an expert. He got called in on a lot of lawsuits and legal stuff. He did a lot of test piloting for things. When he was working for Alaska Airlines, he shot the first landings in a 727 at most of the airfields in Alaska, which places where 727 shouldn't have been able to land, gravel runways, and basically, here you are, here's a stretch of beach in Point Barrow, whatever, land there, and he would do it. And he basically created okay, this is how you land in Juneau, this is how you land here, this is how you land these, in McGrath, he's the one who pioneered a lot of that for Alaska Airlines. And afterwards, he kept doing a lot of pioneering and investigative work for various airlines.
And your mother?
Mother, she was involved in a lot of volunteer stuff, but she quit working, well, when she had my older brother, and then went back to work. And then when she got pregnant with me, she quit again and didn't fly anymore after that. But she eventually got involved in naturopathic medicine. In fact, she worked for the Tahoma Clinic. Dr. Jonathan Wright's world famous as a naturopath engineer, a pioneer in naturopathic medicine, and she worked in his clinic for 10, 15 years. I don't remember how long she worked there, but long time. Anyway.
And the book, is it dedicated to your parents?
Yes, it is. It is also dedicated to, well, here, allow me to read the dedication.
Please,
Yeah.
please. I would like that very much.
To all the men and women who worked on Operation Magic Carpet, especially those whose names have not survived in any record I could find. I know there are so many of you who cared passionately about the airlift and gave everything to make it a success. Please know that what you did saved countless lives and changed history. Your deeds are recorded where it counts most. And to Mom and Dad, without whom this story too would not have happened, and certainly would have been left untold.
Can you also, that's very nice, can you also read for me the flip side, just so that we have...
Okay.
Okay?
Known as On Wings of Eagles and later as Operation Magic Carpet, the emergency Jewish airlift that began in 1948 was meant to rescue Jewish refugees from around the world and bring them to their ancient homeland, the newly reborn nation of Israel. In Shanghai, homeless Jews huddled in ghettos and prayed for rescue. In Yemen, entire tribes of Jews trekked miles of desert and robber-infested mountains to the ancient port city of Aden within the British Protectorate to await a miracle. It came in the form of a tiny, struggling American airline known as Alaska Airlines. Alaskan pilots and crew little suspected that they would create an aviation legend. With inadequate aircraft and no preparation, they risked their lives every time they lifted from Aden or Shanghai runways to fly Jewish refugees across Muslim territory to the new nation of Israel. Warren Metzger and Marian were among those who accepted the challenge. Dodging bullets and bombs, Warren, Marian, and their fellow Alaskans faced danger, bureaucratic bungling, inspirational faith and courage, and deadly peril, witnessing horrors and heroism to help fulfill an ancient prophecy. They bore the scattered children of Israel to the Holy Land on the wings of eagles.
How long did it take you to write the book?
Once I actually got a chance to really write it, I pecked away at it, like I say, over 10 years.
Sure.
But just when I was starting to despair of ever having time to write the book, I got laid off from my job. And it was like, I'm literally wringing my hands, and how am I ever going to do this? I've got to get it written. Sam had just died, and was dying. Was dying, but hadn't died yet. I just met Elgin Long. I knew time was running out, and I've got to get this done. How? And I got laid off. But they gave me a wonderful severance package and it allowed me to stay out of work long enough to write the book. So that was in 2015. And once I sat down and wrote it, I got the first draft done in 6 months. Wow. And then worked over it, refining it for several more months. It took me probably about a year overall to end up with the finished project.
That's
good
timing.
Yeah, well, like I say, I'd been pecking away at it for a decade.
Yeah.
And so I had this part written and this part written, but the whole thing, I had to sit down and do that. And so that was the answer to my prayer.
Is there anything that we didn't talk about? I know that there's a lot of in-depth things that we could get into in the book, but we really don't have that. But is there anything that you feel that we didn't talk about that you would like to say? Is there something?
I'm sure I'll think of 500 things as soon as you turn off the camera and walk away. But right now, no. I wish Mom and Dad had lived to see this. Yeah. I wish Sam had lived to see this. He kept nagging me. So when's it coming out? Are you gonna write the damn thing or not? Sam Silver.
Sam Silver, who was?
He was one of the other pilots. He flew starting in September of '49.
Okay, Sam Silver.
Through I think December of '49. He flew over there, DC-4s, and he also trained. Thank you for reminding me so I could talk about Sam. He also trained a lot of the Israeli fighter pilots to be pilots of a DC-4, and.
In Israel?
Yes.
During the war?
By that time, it was winding down.
But he.
Yeah, a lot of the
Sam
Mahal
Silver,
pilots.
where was he from?
He was Alaska Airlines pilot.
No, but where did he live? I mean, where was he from?
Alaska.
He was from Alaska.
Yeah, he was an
Okay.
Alaskan pilot.
Okay.
Originally, gosh, New Jersey, I'm thinking.
Okay.
Where was he born originally? I don't remember. He'd lived, again, several places and wound up flying for Alaska Airlines and living in Alaska.
Okay.
And,
Silver, and he's
and he's Jewish, although he's secular.
like
Was
this
secular, yeah. Anyway, he started flying for Near East Air Transport, and he was with Alaska Airlines' permission. He said, "May I?" Sure. And then once he was over there, he ferried a DC-4 over that Near East had bought. And then when he was over there, Bob asked him if he would stay and train these fighter pilots to be DC-4 pilots, and he said, and fly the missions, and he said, "Yeah, sure."
Sam Silver.
Sam Silver, yeah, heck of a guy.
I'm glad we got
Yeah.
him for the record.
And he did that. And he had a number of extremely famous fighter pilots and aces flying as his co-pilots. And he says his method of training was to sit there, "Here, this is the throttle, these are the brakes, these are the flaps, keep your damn hands in your lap and don't do anything until I tell you." And that was his way of, getting them to be patient, slow down, and watch and learn. Because fighter pilots tend to be impatient,
Yeah.
quick, and all that. You can't do that with a DC-4, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you. I'm gonna take some photographs, but
Okay.
I want to thank you for your time.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Hopefully this was of help.
And absolutely, that's for sure.